7 children vanished from a summer camp in 1983. 41 years later, a wildfire opened the ground. The summer of 1983 arrived with warm sunshine, cool lake water, and the cheerful excitement of children ready for adventure. Camp Ridgepine, a place tucked between tall pine trees and gentle hills, opened its gates as it did every year. Families drove in from nearby towns, dropping off their children with hugs, promises to write letters, and reminders to have fun. For years, the camp had been known as a friendly and peaceful place. Parents trusted it, children loved it, and counselors took pride in keeping the camp safe and joyful. That year, among the many campers who arrived, 7 children stood out. They were not related, but they quickly formed a special bond. Their names were written on different cabin lists, yet somehow they always drifted toward one another. During mealtimes, they sat at the same table. During activities, they paired up without needing to be asked. Even the counselors noticed how easily they connected. They laughed at the same jokes, loved the same camp songs, and shared the same curiosity about the world around them. The group included children with different personalities. One was shy but loved drawing small birds in a notebook. Another was always eager to explore new paths near the lake. There was a child who liked telling stories, and another who liked listening to them. Some were brave, some careful, some silly, and some thoughtful, but together they created a bright circle of friendship that made people smile. Other campers often said they wished they could join the group because it looked like such fun. The first few days at Camp Ridgepine passed in a happy rhythm. The children learned the camp rules, decorated their cabins, practiced swimming in the lake, and made crafts with colorful beads and strings. The counselors played guitar in the evenings, and everyone sang around the campfire. The 7 friends sat close to one another during these moments, sharing jokes whispered behind cupped hands. At night, when fireflies dotted the dark air, they quietly planned new adventures for the next day. Nothing about the start of camp felt unusual. The weather was calm, the skies bright, and the forest surrounding the camp felt peaceful and friendly. The path leading from the cabins to the lake was lined with smooth stones. The dining hall smelled like fresh pancakes each morning. The sound of the bell ringing for meals echoed across the trees. Everything seemed normal, so normal that no one could have imagined anything would ever disturb the calm routine. In the days leading up to the event that would change the camp forever, the children's routines stayed the same. They attended canoe lessons, where they tried to paddle in perfect rhythm and ended up laughing when they accidentally spun the canoe in circles. They joined nature walks led by the head counselor, who taught them how to identify animal footprints in the soft soil. They participated in team games on the field, cheering for each other even if they didn't win. The 7 friends were always easy to find because they stayed side by side in almost every activity. One evening after dinner, the counselors organized a scavenger hunt. The children ran around the camp in teams, collecting feathers, smooth stones, pine cones, and anything else on the list. The 7 friends were not on the same team officially, yet somehow they ended up helping one another anyway. When one found something, they whispered hints to the others. Their laughter echoed across the yard, bright and warm like the golden glow of sunset. At the end of the game, none of the counselors minded that the groups had blended together. They were simply happy to see the campers enjoying themselves so much. As the week continued, the camp felt like a little world of its own. The outside world seemed far away. The children had no reason to think about anything except enjoying each day. The 7 friends especially felt like they had discovered something magical in their time together. When they sat by the lake, dipping their toes into the cool water, they made simple promises to stay friends even after camp ended. They talked about writing letters, visiting each other's towns, and returning next summer to the same camp, maybe even the same cabin. On the morning of the day everything changed, the sun rose gently over the lake, turning the surface into a sheet of shimmering gold. A soft fog hovered above the water, something not unusual for early mornings in that area. The counselors moved quietly through the camp, preparing breakfast, setting up tables, and checking equipment for the day's planned activities. Some of them had noticed the fog seemed a bit thicker than usual, but not enough to raise concern. Fog came and went easily in this part of the forest. One counselor walked by the cabins and tapped on the doors, calling out cheerful good mornings and reminding everyone to get ready for breakfast. At Cabin Laurel, one of the counselors waited for the usual sound of scrambling feet and sleepy voices. But the cabin was quiet. At first, she thought the children were simply tired and slow to wake. She knocked again, this time a little louder. Still no answer. She opened the door and stepped inside. The room was tidy, beds neatly made, but the space felt strangely empty. She checked under the bunk beds, behind the door, and even peeked into the small closet. Nothing. There was no sign of the 7 children who were supposed to be there. Their personal belongings, flashlights, notebooks, folded clothes, were still in place, exactly where they had left them the previous night. Trying not to assume anything serious, the counselor hurried to the dining hall. Perhaps the children had woken early and gone straight there. But when she arrived, the hall was still empty except for the kitchen staff preparing breakfast. No small shoes at the doorway, no group chatting quietly at the long tables. She asked a few other counselors if they had seen the 7 children. Each one shook their heads. The counselor began searching nearby spots: the lake pier, the arts and crafts shed, the path leading to the field, anywhere the group might have wandered to as a morning adventure. She expected to see them skipping down a path, maybe giggling and whispering about a funny dream someone had. But each spot she checked was empty. More counselors joined the search, thinking perhaps the children had simply gotten lost on a walk together. But as they spread out in different directions, calling their names, there was still no answer. It became clear that they needed to check more carefully. Although no one wanted to alarm the other campers, a quiet but urgent search began around the campgrounds. The counselors moved through the trees, checked the lake shore, and followed the small trails that children often used to explore. They kept hoping to find the group sitting somewhere, laughing and unaware of the worry they were causing. But the camp remained quiet, except for the sound of birds in the branches. As the morning continued, the sense of confusion grew. The children had not taken any belongings, food, or supplies. Their shoes were still neatly placed under their cabin beds, suggesting they had not walked far. The counselors tried to make sense of the situation. Everything they knew about the 7 friends told them the group was cheerful, responsible, and not the type to sneak off or cause trouble. The idea that they had wandered far from camp made little sense. The fog that morning gave the surroundings a dreamlike feeling, softening details and blurring the distance. Some counselors wondered if it had somehow made it harder to see where the children had gone. Others thought maybe the group had discovered something interesting, like an animal or an unusual rock formation, and followed it without realizing how far they were walking. But there were no footprints, no rustled leaves, nothing disturbed that might show a trail. The camp director, a calm and experienced leader, tried to keep everyone steady. He instructed the counselors to continue searching the immediate area while ensuring that the rest of the campers remained in supervised activities. It was important, he felt, not to create fear or confusion for the other children. He believed the 7 campers would appear soon. Perhaps they were just in a hidden corner of the forest, talking and laughing, unaware of the growing concern. However, as noon approached and more time passed, worry settled into the atmosphere like a quiet cloud. The counselors decided to widen the search area, checking beyond the usual trails. The camp director radioed nearby staff members, asking if anyone had seen the children walking near the perimeter. But every answer was the same. No one had seen them since the previous night. By midday, the camp felt different. The cheerful sounds of morning activities had softened, replaced with a quiet tension. The counselors continued their efforts, moving carefully through the forest, calling the children's names in warm, friendly tones. They hoped for a simple answer, a quick reunion, and smiles of relief. But the forest remained still. The children's cabins were checked again. Their beds, perfectly made, looked untouched. Their belongings were exactly as they had left them. The small details felt important to the counselors because they showed something unusual. The children had not prepared to go anywhere. They had not packed a bag or taken a sweater or even filled their water bottles. It was as if they had stepped out only for a moment and simply not returned. As the day continued, the calm of Camp Ridgepen began to feel fragile. The sunshine, the gentle lake, and the rustling trees were the same as always, yet the mood had changed. The counselors quietly continued their tasks, hoping for the moment when 7 familiar children would reappear with bright faces and simple explanations. But that moment did not come. Through the afternoon, the camp director made the difficult decision to reach out for help. He did so carefully and calmly, wanting to be sure that every step was taken with care. As assistance began to arrive, the camp still held onto a sense of hope. Everyone believed there must be a simple reason for the situation. Maybe the children had found a hidden clearing and were resting there. Maybe they had taken a wrong turn on a path and were waiting to be found. The counselors clung to these possibilities. That evening, when the sky turned a soft shade of blue and the first stars began to appear, the camp felt strangely quiet. The 7 friends, who had been a lively and joyful presence each day, were missed deeply, not because anyone feared harm, but because their absence left a space that felt unexpected and confusing. The counselors, the camp director, and even some older campers sat together, thinking about every memory they had of the 7 children. They remembered the way the group laughed during canoe practice, the way they huddled close during evening songs, and the way they planned their adventures with excitement in their eyes. Everyone hoped that soon those 7 bright faces would appear again, safe and smiling, ready to tell a story about where they had been. But that night passed quietly, and the mystery began to take shape, not through fear or dark assumptions, but through a deep and gentle uncertainty that no one could yet understand. Camp Ridgepine, a place once known only for joy and peace, now held a question that settled softly into every mind, waiting for an answer that had not yet come. For many years after that unforgettable summer day, Camp Ridgepine stood quiet and still. The buildings, once full of laughter and the sound of running feet, slowly began to fade. The wooden cabins that once held stories and secrets were left untouched. The dining hall, where children once lined up for pancakes and juice, stayed closed and covered in dust. The dock by the lake no longer felt the gentle footsteps of campers waiting for their turn to paddle a canoe. Everything remained in place, yet the liveliness that once filled the camp was gone, as if a warm light had been turned off. The disappearance of the 7 children created a quiet sadness in the community. It was not the kind of sadness that shouted or demanded attention. It was a soft, lingering feeling that settled deep inside the hearts of parents, neighbors, and anyone who had ever stepped foot in the camp. Weeks turned into months, and then months into years. People tried to continue with their lives, but the memory of the 7 friends stayed with them like a tender bruise that never fully healed. Families of the missing children held on to hope for as long as they could. Some believed that one day their child might walk through the front door wearing the same smile they had left with. Others hoped for a small sign, perhaps a letter, a phone call, a message from someone far away who had seen them. They imagined all kinds of possibilities, most of them gentle and filled with optimism. But as time passed and those hopeful moments never arrived, reality settled quietly around them. The town nearby changed slowly over the years. New houses were built, roads were improved, and businesses opened and closed. Children grew up, moved away, and started families of their own. Yet whenever someone mentioned Camp Ridgepine, a hush would fall over conversations. It was not a fearful silence, but a respectful one, an understanding that some stories lived in the background of people's minds, too delicate to disturb. The families of the 7 children eventually created a small remembrance group. They met every summer not to relive sadness, but to honor the bright and joyful memories of their children. They shared stories of the children's favorite games, their personalities, and their dreams. These gatherings were gentle events, filled with soft laughter and quiet moments. They reminded each other of the bond their children had shared, even though none of them knew how that bond had followed the children on that final day at camp. The camp itself was officially closed 2 summers after the disappearance. The decision was difficult but necessary. Parents no longer felt comfortable sending their children to a place connected to an unsolved mystery, even though no one believed the camp had caused any harm. The staff, who had once loved working there, found it too heavy on their hearts to continue. So the gates closed, the buildings locked, and nature slowly began to reclaim the land. Trees grew taller and thicker around the edges of the campgrounds. Grass spread across the pathways where children once ran during games. Vines wrapped themselves around the wooden posts near the lake. The forest seemed to gently embrace the camp, as if trying to comfort it. Some people said the area carried a peaceful stillness, while others said the quiet felt a little too deep, like a story that had gone unfinished. Over the next 40 years, the case remained a mystery. Detectives came and went, each one reviewing old files, searching for connections that previous investigators might have missed. Some thought there must have been an answer hidden somewhere, waiting patiently to be discovered. Others gently admitted that the truth might never be known. Even so, the case continued to surface every few years, especially whenever a journalist or a local historian found interest in the story. News reporters occasionally wrote articles about the disappearance. They highlighted the strange absence of clues and the way the children seemed to have vanished in a moment. These stories always stirred up memories for those who had lived through the event. Readers shared the articles with comments like, "I remember that summer," or "I went to that camp once." Although people spoke carefully, there was still a sense of wonder and sadness in their voices. Some townspeople created their own theories about what might have happened. None of these ideas involved anything harmful or frightening. They were simply imaginative explanations born from years of trying to understand the unknown. Some believed the children might have followed an animal deeper into the woods. Others thought they might have discovered a hidden spot they did not know how to return from. A few people wondered if the children had tried to surprise someone with a secret plan or game, but had somehow gotten lost. Each theory tried to provide comfort, not fear. As the years passed, fewer people from the original generation remained in the town. New residents heard only parts of the story or read old newspaper clippings that left out the emotional details. To them, Camp Ridgepine was simply an overgrown piece of land with old buildings hidden behind trees. They did not feel the same weight of memory that older residents carried. But those who had lived through the event, especially the families of the children, never forgot. The parents who were young adults in 1983 grew older. Some of them kept their child's room exactly as it had been, even decades later. Others kept boxes filled with drawings, letters, toys, and photographs. They held onto these items not out of sadness, but out of love. The memories helped them feel connected to a time when their children's laughter still filled their homes. Every summer, without fail, the Remembrance Group met on the same weekend. They gathered near the forest's edge, not far from the closed camp. They shared sandwiches, lemonade, and stories. Some years, new family members joined, brothers, sisters, grandchildren, who had never met the missing children but had heard the stories many times. The gatherings became a way to pass down those memories, making sure they stayed alive even as time moved forward. Although the group continued to meet, the campgrounds remained untouched. After the camp closed, the state considered turning the area into a park, but plans never moved forward. Some thought it was best to leave the land as it was, peaceful and quiet. Others felt the land had its own kind of dignity, a natural respect that shouldn't be disturbed. Over time, the buildings began to weaken. The paint peeled, the roofs sagged, and windows collected layers of dust and leaves. People who passed by the road occasionally glanced in the direction of the camp and felt a small weight in their hearts. They remembered stories from long ago. They remembered the rush of search teams arriving, the quiet conversations among neighbors, and the feeling of waiting each day for news that never came. The ground seemed to hold those memories too, buried deep beneath roots, soil, and time. 41 years is a long time. Children who were campers in 1983 became adults, and those adults became older adults with children and grandchildren. Many of them moved away over the years, settling in new towns and building new lives. But even those who left always carried a quiet memory of Camp Ridgepine. When they returned to their hometown for visits, they sometimes found themselves driving near the old path that led to the camp, even if they did not stop. Just seeing the trees in the distance brought back flashes of childhood. A canoe gliding across water, a nighttime song sung under the stars, or a group of 7 bright smiles. Local teachers occasionally mentioned the disappearance when speaking about the town's history. They did so gently, focusing on the community's response and the hope people held on to. Students listened with wide eyes, not out of worry, but out of curiosity about how their town had lived through something so mysterious. The story became part of the town's identity, softened by time, shaped by kindness, and remembered with care. Over the decades, nature transformed the camp into something almost unrecognizable. The once clear pathways became covered in soft moss. Trees grew where picnic tables used to stand. The lake, calm as always, reflected the sky with the same gentle beauty, but the dock looked old and tired. The forest around the camp felt denser, as if protecting the land with its quiet presence. Despite the passing years, there was always a small group of people who believed the truth would someday reveal itself. They felt that time had a way of uncovering what had been lost, even if it took much longer than expected. They believed in patience and in the idea that the earth itself sometimes held answers that appeared only when the moment was right. Some older residents said they occasionally felt a strange pull to the campgrounds, as if the land was waiting. The feeling wasn't spooky or unsettling, it was more like a gentle calling, a reminder that a story had been paused rather than finished. They wondered if future generations would learn more than they had. Deep down, they hoped so. The families of the missing children continued to find ways to honor their loved ones. Some donated books to the town library in their children's names. Others planted trees in nearby parks, each one representing a hopeful memory. Over time, these trees grew tall and strong, offering shade and comfort to people who had no idea what they symbolized. Yet the families knew, and that was enough. Though many years had passed, the disappearance never turned into a cold or frightening tale. Instead, it became a gentle reminder of how deeply communities care for one another. Even after 4 decades, people still paused whenever the subject came up. They spoke softly, shared memories, and expressed hope that someday, somehow, the full story would come to light. And as the years continued to pass, the forest remained quiet. The ground beneath Camp Ridgepine held its secret peacefully, waiting for the moment when the world would finally be ready to see what time had hidden. In the summer of 2024, the quiet land around the old camp changed once again. For many years, the forest had grown thicker, and plants had wrapped themselves comfortably around every forgotten structure. The air had always been calm in that place, and the trees had stood like gentle guardians, holding memories from long ago. But that year, the weather shifted in a way people in the town had not seen before. Days became unusually warm, the sky felt drier than normal, and even the breeze carried a faint heat in it. The nearby townspeople noticed the change little by little. They spoke about how the grass seemed more brittle and how the pine trees gave off a strong summer scent, as if preparing for something. Although the weather did not frighten anyone, it made them pay closer attention to the forest. Nature, after all, had its own ways of reminding people that everything was connected. One afternoon, a soft haze appeared in the distance. It was not thick or alarming, just a light, smoky curtain that made the air shimmer under the sun. Someone driving past the forest thought the haze looked strange and mentioned it at a local cafe. People listened, a few raised their eyebrows, but no one assumed anything serious. Haze during a hot summer was not unusual. But by the next morning, the haze had grown thicker, and a golden glow was rising from the direction of the old camp. A small wildfire had begun. It did not roar or rush through the forest. Instead, it moved slowly, almost thoughtfully, warming the dry patches of ground and lighting the tips of fallen leaves. Fire crews arrived with calm determination. They were trained for moments like this, and they understood how to control a fire without becoming overwhelmed. Their plan was simple: watch the movement, guide it gently, and protect any homes or structures in nearby areas. The fire stayed focused mostly in the abandoned land around the old camp. Since no one lived there and no buildings were used anymore, the fire crews allowed certain parts to burn under their careful supervision. This helped remove dried plants that might have caused larger problems later. Even though the fire spread, it moved at an easy pace, giving crews time to guide it safely. Birds flew above, watching with curiosity, and small animals in the forest quietly stepped away from the warm patches of land, finding shelter deeper in the woods. By evening, the sky glowed softly, and a warm orange color settled over the trees. The sight, though unusual, was strangely peaceful. People from the town stood on their porches watching the distant glow, talking in calm voices. They said things like, "It will clear out the old brush, and maybe it will help new plants grow." No one felt fear. Instead, they felt respect for nature's way of renewing itself. The old campgrounds, however, were reacting in a different way. For 41 years, the land had remained quiet, holding stories that no one had fully understood. The fire warmed the soil, touched the wooden remains of cabins, and gently burned away fallen branches that had rested there for decades. Smoke curled softly into the sky, carrying with it the scent of pine and dried grass. As the ground warmed, something unexpected began to happen. There was an area at the back of the camp that few people remembered clearly. It was a spot where the forest floor dipped slightly, almost like a natural bowl. Over the years, leaves had fallen into it, plants had grown over it, and no one ever thought much about it. But as the fire warmed the soil, the ground began to shift just a little. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a soft, settling sound, like earth adjusting itself after a long rest. The next morning, as the fire crews continued their work, one of them noticed something unusual in that part of the forest. The earth looked uneven, and the top layer of soil appeared darker, as if it had dipped inward. Curious, the crew member walked closer. The ground was still warm, but safe enough to approach. And then he saw it, a small opening, not large at first, but clear enough to show that something beneath the surface had changed. He called over the others. They gathered around the area, speaking quietly to one another. The opening did not look dangerous. It looked more like the top of a hollow space that had been hidden beneath the earth for a long time. The fire had gently cleared away the surface, allowing the ground to give way and reveal what lay below. The fire captain decided they should pause their work and observe the opening more carefully. There was no rush. The fire nearby was calm and controlled, and the forest around them was quiet. They marked off the area and notified local officials, explaining that the wildfire had uncovered something unusual. At first, no one thought it was connected to the old mystery. People believed the forest simply held natural pockets of space or old structures from decades past. When investigators arrived that afternoon, the air was still warm from the fire, but the immediate danger had passed. They approached the opening with calm curiosity, taking notes and carefully brushing away loose soil. As they worked, the opening grew clearer. Beneath the surface was a hollow chamber, large enough that it could not have formed naturally in such a shape. The walls inside seemed to be made of old wood, faded and fragile from age. It looked like a structure of some kind, something built long ago and forgotten. The investigators widened the opening carefully, removing debris with soft brushes and small tools. They did not want to disturb anything more than necessary. As more of the chamber appeared, the investigators began to talk quietly among themselves. They wondered if the structure could be related to storage from the old camp, or perhaps a shelter built before the camp even existed. The town had a long history, and many buildings from earlier generations had disappeared with time. News of the discovery spread quickly but gently. People in the nearby town heard about it through messages, small conversations, and curious questions. Some felt a subtle stirring in their hearts, a reminder of the old mystery that had never been solved. They wondered if this unexpected discovery might offer some clarity. Others thought it was simply an interesting historical find. The following day, a team of specialists arrived to examine the underground chamber more closely. They brought equipment that allowed them to lower a light into the space without stepping inside. The chamber looked surprisingly organized, almost like a room with purpose. Wooden beams lined the walls, and parts of the floor appeared smooth. Time had worn everything down, but the structure was still recognizable. As the specialists studied the space, they discovered something that made them pause. Near one corner of the chamber, lying softly in the dust, were items that looked familiar even after so many years. A small flashlight with faded paint, a bracelet made of colorful string, a small notebook with the corner still intact. These objects looked like they belonged to children from long ago. For a moment, the investigators did not speak. They simply observed the items, feeling the weight of history settle gently around them. They handled everything with great care, making sure to disturb nothing more than necessary. When they finally lifted the objects from the dust, their movements were soft and respectful. News of what had been found reached the town by evening. People reacted quietly. They gathered in living rooms, at kitchen tables, and in soft conversations outside small shops. The discovery did not bring fear, it brought reflection. Memories of the 7 missing children drifted back into people's minds, tenderly and thoughtfully. They wondered if the underground chamber held answers long hidden by time. The next morning, a team entered the chamber carefully. They wore protective gear not because of danger, but because they wanted to preserve the old structure. Inside, the air felt still, like a place that had been waiting patiently. Dust floated gently in the beams of light shining from above. The walls, though old, still showed the outlines of wooden panels. The space felt purposeful, though no one yet understood exactly what it had been used for. As they moved through the chamber, they found more objects, small items, each one worn by time but recognizable. A shoe with a partially faded design, a lunchbox with a cartoon character nearly erased, a folded scarf with a tiny embroidered name. These items told a story of their own, one rooted in friendship and childhood. The investigators handled each object with care, setting them aside in labeled containers. They spoke in soft voices, sharing thoughts and theories. No one jumped to conclusions. Instead, they approached everything with calm curiosity, knowing that time had finally offered them a chance to understand something that had puzzled generations. The chamber itself held no danger. It felt more like a forgotten room than anything else. The ceiling, though delicate, was stable enough for the investigators to move safely. The floor was dusty but smooth. It was clear the structure had been built thoughtfully at some point in the past, though by whom remained unclear. Word spread beyond the town, reaching former residents who had moved far away. Many of them felt a quiet sense of connection to the discovery. They remembered the summer of 1983, the laughter of children at the camp, and the gentle sadness that had followed the disappearance. Though decades had passed, the memory still lived gently in their hearts. For the specialists, the discovery was not just about solving a mystery, it was about honoring a story. The fire, though small and controlled, had acted almost like a key, clearing away the surface of the forest and allowing something long hidden to be seen again. Nature had played its role in the unfolding of the story, opening the ground in a way no one could have predicted. The camp, once quiet for so long, was now filled with soft footsteps, careful voices, and gentle curiosity. The land seemed to welcome the attention, as if grateful that people had returned with respect and patience. The forest surrounding the camp remained calm, and the air carried a sense of anticipation, like a moment before someone finishes a long-awaited sentence. The discovery of the chamber marked the beginning of a new chapter. The town did not feel fear or shock. Instead, it felt a growing sense of understanding. Something long hidden was finally being seen, not with alarm, but with care. The pieces of the past were slowly coming together, like a puzzle that had waited more than 40 years for patient hands to complete it. And as the specialists continued their work, the forest around them stood quietly, as if watching over the scene. The fire had passed, the ground had opened, and the story, once paused for decades, was beginning to move again, gently and thoughtfully, toward the truth. The days following the discovery of the underground chamber brought a new wave of quiet activity to the old campgrounds. People arrived not with urgency or fear, but with soft steps and thoughtful eyes. The land, which had stood untouched for so long, now welcomed careful attention from specialists who understood how important it was to move slowly, respectfully, and with steady hands. The chamber uncovered by the wildfire was unlike anything the investigators had expected. It was larger than it first appeared, with small interconnected areas that suggested it had once been built with purpose. The walls, made of wood long aged by time, showed signs of craftsmanship. Some boards were smoother, others slightly curved, and all were placed in a way that meant someone long ago had carefully shaped the space. The discovery raised many questions. What was the chamber originally used for? Who had built it? Why had it been sealed beneath the ground? The investigators didn't expect fast answers. Instead, they approached the site like a quiet conversation with the past, gentle, patient, and open to whatever truth would slowly come forward. Each morning, the team gathered at the edge of the opening before starting their work. They reviewed their notes, discussed new ideas, and reminded one another to be mindful of every detail. The weather remained warm, and the forest air carried the soft scent of pine. Birds returned to their usual perches, singing calmly as if welcoming the respectful visitors. Flashlights were lowered into the chamber first. Beams of light moved across the dust-covered floor and illuminated the worn wooden beams. The investigators used small, soft brushes to clear away soil, allowing them to see the chamber more clearly. They discovered markings on some of the boards, nothing frightening or dramatic, simply faded penciled lines or small dots someone might have used during construction. The chamber was divided into several sections. One seemed open and wide, like a room meant to gather in. Another space had narrow shelves along one wall, which had once held jars, boxes, or small objects that time had since worn away. In another corner, there was a low bench-like structure, its wood smoothed by years of pressure. Everything inside appeared simple, old-fashioned, and touched by decades of quiet. Near the back of the chamber, the investigators found a small area where the soil was lighter. When they brushed it aside, they discovered more personal items. A tiny whistle made of metal, a button with a small picture on it, and a folded piece of cloth with a child's name sewn into the corner. These discoveries filled the chamber with a tender sense of memory. They were gentle reminders of lives once full of normal childhood moments, moments of play, creativity, and friendship. Each object was lifted with care and placed into safe containers. The mood of the investigators was not heavy or gloomy, it was thoughtful. They understood that these items were part of a story long held in the hearts of many people. They wanted to honor that story fully. As they worked deeper into the chamber, they discovered an old lantern resting near one wall. Its glass was cracked, but the metal frame remained. Next to it lay a pile of small stones arranged in a circular shape, almost like a pattern or design children might create during play. Though the stones were simple, their placement carried a quiet meaning. They suggested that someone had taken time to arrange them thoughtfully. The investigators also noticed the chamber's air felt different in some sections. In certain corners, the air was cooler and more still, giving the space a preserved feeling. It was as if time had slowed inside, keeping the room almost exactly as it had been decades earlier. The dust patterns on the floor showed no signs of disturbance for many years. In the farthest section of the chamber, beneath a layer of fallen wood and decades-old soil, the investigators found something that deepened the story in a profound way. Resting gently in the dust were small, fragile remains, evidence that the chamber had once been occupied by the 7 missing children. The remains were not described in detail. The investigators treated them with the highest respect, acknowledging what they represented without focusing on anything unsettling. The moment of discovery was quiet. The investigators paused with soft expressions, understanding the weight of what they had found. This was not a moment for fear or shock, only for compassion. They took great care, moving gently, making sure nothing was disturbed more than necessary. The remains were treated with dignity, and each investigator felt the significance of bringing closure to a story that had rested unanswered for over 40 years. Outside the chamber, the forest seemed to recognize the moment. The breeze softened. Leaves rustled in a calm whisper. The sunlight filtered through branches with a warm, golden glow. Nature, in its own way, seemed to offer comfort. When the findings were shared with officials, the news reached the families of the missing children with tenderness. Representatives met with them personally, speaking gently, explaining that although no one could fully understand exactly what had happened so long ago, the children had now been located. Their story, though still containing mysteries, had finally reached a place of peace. The families responded with quiet emotion. Some closed their eyes, whispering their children's names softly like a blessing. Others held hands with those beside them. There were tears, but none born from fear, only from love, remembrance, and the relief of finally knowing where their children had been. The investigators continued to explore the chamber, hoping to learn more without disturbing the space unnecessarily. They found a small wooden board with faint markings on it, perhaps a child's drawing or simple doodles from a quiet moment inside the chamber. They found smooth stones arranged in another pattern, as if the children had created designs to pass time. These gentle traces painted a picture of companionship and shared imagination. One investigator noticed something else. The entrance to the chamber showed signs that it had once been open, but later covered naturally. There was no indication of anything harmful or intentional. Over time, soil might have shifted, plants grown over it, and weather slowly sealed the entrance without anyone realizing. With decades passing, the forest had simply held its secret quietly. The chamber also contained old wooden boards that suggested someone had tried to reinforce the walls long ago. These boards looked older than anything related to the camp itself. Some historians believed the chamber might have been built during the early 1960s, possibly as a simple underground storage space or shelter used for practical reasons during that time. If that was true, then the children of 1983 may have discovered it accidentally and entered it out of curiosity, unaware that the opening could settle behind them. This idea, though still a theory, brought gentle comfort to many. It offered a picture of an innocent discovery, followed by an unexpected situation where the forest, time, and nature played their roles without intention or harm. Nothing dark or frightening was suggested. Instead, the story leaned toward a quiet, natural chain of events that had simply remained hidden. Once the chamber had been fully documented, the items found inside were carefully collected, cleaned, and preserved. The families were offered the chance to view the items privately if they wished. Some chose to do so, holding the belongings with gentle hands and remembering the children with warm smiles. They shared stories of when those objects had first been bought or gifted, turning the moment into something loving rather than sorrowful. The town, upon learning the full story, reacted with deep compassion. People visited each other's homes, offering warm words and gentle company. Some placed flowers near the entrance of the forest, not as a memorial of sadness, but as a symbol of peace and closure. Local artists drew soft illustrations of the forest and the chamber, focusing on themes of discovery, friendship, and connection. As weeks passed, the investigation team prepared their final summary. They explained that while certain questions might remain forever unanswered, the essential truth had been uncovered. The 7 missing children had been found in a place that had held them gently for many years. They emphasized that the chamber showed no signs of harm, only time and natural changes. Nature had kept the story safe, and the wildfire, unexpected as it was, had allowed the truth to come forward. The fire had not been destructive in this case, it had been transformative. By clearing away old brush and warming the soil, it had unlocked something that had been waiting beneath the surface for over 4 decades. The land around the old camp felt different now. Instead of carrying a quiet weight of unanswered questions, it carried a sense of gentle completion. When people visited the area, they no longer felt uncertainty, they felt calm respect. The forest seemed to breathe easier, its branches swaying softly as if acknowledging that a long chapter had finally been turned. The families, though still holding on to the memories of their children, found comfort in knowing that the children's final resting place had been peaceful and untouched. They felt that the forest had watched over their children with care, protecting the story until the time was right for it to be revealed. As time continued, the town decided to place a simple marker near the camp. It was not elaborate or heavy with emotion. It carried a warm message about remembrance, friendship, and the passage of time. It reminded future generations of the 7 children whose bright spirits had once filled the camp with laughter and who remained connected to the land in a gentle, meaningful way. The chamber, after being studied and understood, was carefully sealed again, not to hide it, but to respect it. The land around it was restored with soft soil and native plants. The area will forever remain part of the town's story, held with care and remembered with love. And through it all, the forest stood quietly, its leaves whispering stories only nature could hold. The truth had finally come to light, softly and thoughtfully, allowing everyone touched by the story to find peace in knowing that the 7 friends had been together, watched over by the earth, and rediscovered when the time was right. The discovery of the underground chamber brought quiet closure to a mystery that had rested for more than 4 decades. But with closure came many new thoughts, reflections, and questions, some answered, some left open like soft pages of a book that future generations might one day revisit. The town entered a period of thoughtful calm. People spoke in warm tones, not about fear or confusion, but about understanding, memory, and the gentle ways time can guide a story toward its long-awaited ending. In the weeks that followed, the investigators shared a carefully prepared summary with the community. They explained everything with simple, respectful language. They described how the wildfire had uncovered the hidden chamber, how objects belonging to the 7 children had been found inside, and how the chamber itself showed signs of age and peaceful stillness. They reminded everyone that no harmful evidence had been discovered, only history, time, and nature working together in a way no one could have predicted. The families came together once more. This time, however, their gathering felt different. There was still emotion in their voices, but it was gentle and steady, not weighed down by fear or unanswered wonder. They shared stories about their children again, how one loved to draw animals, how another dreamed of building treehouses, how one could never stop laughing during campfire songs. These stories brought smiles. They were not reminders of loss, but celebrations of the children's joyful spirits. Some families chose to keep the personal items that had been found in the chamber. A bracelet, a flashlight, a scarf with a name sewn into it. Holding these items was like touching a piece of time that had been quietly preserved. Others chose to place their children's belongings inside small memory boxes, wrapped in soft cloth. They wanted the items to stay safe, just as the forest had kept them safe for 41 years. Many townspeople visited the area near the old camp in the quiet mornings after the discovery. They did not come to see anything specific, because most of the chamber had already been carefully closed to protect it. They simply came to feel the forest's calmness and to reflect on the many years the land had held its secret. Some walked slowly along the tree line, their footsteps quiet on the soft ground. Others sat on fallen logs, listening to the wind weaving through the branches. The land seemed to welcome these gentle visitors. Local community groups organized small events to honor the 7 children. These gatherings were peaceful and filled with love. One group planted wildflowers that would bloom every spring. Another created a simple wooden bench with the names of the 7 children carved softly into its surface. The bench was placed near the lake where campers once learned to paddle canoes. Anyone who sat there could look across the water and feel the beauty of the place that had once brought so much joy to the children. A local art teacher invited her students to paint pictures inspired by nature and friendship. Many children drew scenes of tall trees, quiet lakes, colorful sunsets, and groups of friends holding hands. These drawings were later displayed in the town hall, filling the space with warm colors and hopeful messages. Adults who viewed the artwork felt touched by the innocence and kindness in each picture. As the story spread gently beyond the town, people from other areas reached out with words of sympathy, respect, and support. They admired the town's strength, the family's courage, and the investigators' careful, respectful work. News articles were written with soft, thoughtful language, focusing not on mystery or fear, but on closure, community, and the way nature can reveal truth in calm and quiet ways. Documentary filmmakers visited the town to learn more, but they approached their work with sensitivity. They interviewed former campers, counselors, and family members who wished to share memories. Everyone spoke with warm voices, describing the camp not as a place of sadness, but as a place filled with light, laughter, and childhood adventure. Their words helped shape a story that showed the beauty of human connection even in the face of uncertainty. The state decided to preserve the area around the camp as a protected natural space. Rather than rebuilding or developing anything, they chose to let the land remain peaceful. Walking paths were added near the perimeter, allowing visitors to enjoy the forest without disturbing the chamber. Signs were placed along the paths with messages about nature, history, and the importance of cherishing community. The signs did not mention details of the disappearance. Instead, they focused on hope, remembrance, and the quiet ways the past shapes the present. Years later, former residents returned to visit, some with their children and grandchildren. They pointed out the places where cabins once stood, the location of the dining hall, and the trail that led to the lake. They shared stories about campfire nights, nature walks, and the laughter that once filled the air. Even those who had been children at the time of the disappearance spoke about the 7 friends with kindness, remembering their eagerness, creativity, and bright personalities. The forest itself changed with the seasons, but carried a lasting sense of calm. In spring, soft green leaves appeared on branches that had watched over the land for decades. In summer, sunlight filtered through the trees, creating warm patches of golden light on the forest floor. In autumn, leaves turned gentle shades of orange, yellow, and red, drifting slowly to the ground. And in winter, snow rested quietly across the campgrounds like a peaceful blanket. The chamber remained untouched beneath the earth, sealed respectfully and marked only on official maps. It was not a place people visited. Instead, it remained a place of history, calm, protected, and honored from a distance. The land above it continued to thrive with plants, small animals, and the soft chorus of the forest. The families of the 7 children formed a foundation in their memory. The foundation offered scholarships to young students who loved nature, science, or art, interests the seven friends had shared. Applicants were asked to write about friendship, curiosity, and the importance of exploring the world with kindness. Many young people benefited from the foundation, carrying the spirit of the seven children into their own futures. One year, the town created a special day of remembrance. It was not held to mourn, but to celebrate childhood, discovery, and the joy of being young. Families gathered at the lake with picnic baskets, games, and musical instruments. Children ran across the grass, laughing just as the seven friends once had. People sang songs, told stories, and released floating lanterns onto the water at sunset. The lanterns drifted gently, their reflections glowing softly on the lake's surface. Many believed it was the perfect way to honor the light the seven children had brought into the world. The town historian wrote a small book describing the story in a gentle, respectful way. She focused on the camp's history, the bond between the seven children, and the remarkable discovery made decades later. She wrote about the community's unity, the patience of the families, and the quiet wisdom nature sometimes holds. The book became a meaningful keepsake, cherished not for its mystery, but for its heart. Teachers shared the story with students as an example of how communities support one another through difficult times. They highlighted the importance of kindness, teamwork, and remembering those who came before. Students listened with thoughtful expressions, understanding that the story was not only about the past, but also about compassion in the present. As the years moved on, the once mysterious tale transformed into a gentle chapter of town history. The seven children were remembered not as a mystery, but as symbols of joy, friendship, and togetherness. Their story encouraged people to appreciate each moment, to care for one another, and to stay connected even as time passed. Visitors who walked through the protected forest often said they felt a sense of peace there. Some believed the land carried the soft energy of the children's memories, playful, curious, and gentle. Others felt that the discovery had allowed the forest to breathe freely again, no longer holding secrets but sharing quiet beauty with anyone who entered. With each passing year, the town continued to grow, change, and welcome new families. But the story of the seven children remained part of its heart, woven into conversations, traditions, and the calm presence of the forest. The wildfire that had once seemed unexpected was now seen as an event that helped illuminate the truth, offering closure without sorrow. People often say that certain stories stay alive not because of what happened, but because of the love that surrounds them. The tale of the seven children became one of those stories. It lived on through kindness, memory, and the gentle belief that time has a way of revealing what is needed when the world is ready to understand it. The land around the old camp remained beautiful and serene. Sunlight danced between the trees, birds glided through the sky, and the breeze carried the soft scent of pine. Anyone who stood there could feel the harmony of nature and the quiet comfort of a story finally laid to rest. And so the final chapter of the children's story did not end with unanswered fear or lingering sorrow. It ended with peace, soft, warm, and lasting. The forest held their memories gently, the town carried their story with love, and the world continued to turn with the understanding that even mysteries can find calm endings when patience, respect, and kindness lead the way.